This is Kid Shriner, the voice of the Green Arrow.
This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
You are listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
The original Justice League has become a memory.
I am resigning from the Justice League.
What's going to happen to the League now?
We rebuild. From the ashes of that great conflict, a new team has arisen. A much, much bigger team.
Each of you brings something different to the table.
Old friends, new heroes. And as usual, plenty of bad guys jumping up to get beat down.
Calm down, and I'll let you go.
How about you kiss my ass?
Watch out, evildoers. There's nowhere to run. Because this year, they're all around you. The League is unlimited. An all-new original series, starring every superhero worth cheering for. And then some. Justice League Unlimited.
Where am I exactly?
Among friends.
There's strength in numbers.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 330 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend and good brother, Liam. Liam, after a 2-week little hiatus here from our standard reviews, but not from hashtag content, we are back with a standard episode, a standard review, and we are here for the next 2 weeks to discuss one of the more memorable episodes of maybe the entire Justice League Unlimited run, and certainly the most memorable episode for a lot of reasons from this very first season. That's right, we're tackling the Season 1 finale of Justice League Unlimited, and that's an exciting one that involves a lot of cameos from characters we might not otherwise see, which is a weird thing to say in Justice League Unlimited. But not only that, but time travel and some special appearances by characters new and old friends, you might say, here to join our heroes on a time-traveling journey as we cover this week's episode.
That's right. Yeah, this is I think one that's been from early on. I think we were kind of excited and champing at the bit to talk about this one. But as we'll get to at the end of this week's episode, there was a certain pretty far down the line episode of Batman Beyond that we needed to tackle first to get this, to have this make sense and have the most impact possible when we reviewed it. So we finally arrived. The stars have finally aligned, and here we are with the Once and Future Thing Part 1, sometimes called the Once and Future Thing Part 1, Weird Western Tales. Apparently.
Had no recollection of that. It's funny. It's like a Mandela effect thing or something. Like everywhere I look, even when you Google it, the Once and Future Thing Part 1, the top result is Weird Western Tales, and the top result comes up with that as like the official title of the episode. So I have no recollection of that. Always called it Once and Future Thing Part 1, but apparently you had a memory of it being maybe listed on the Cartoon Network website, apparently as this weird subtitle, and it is listed on the Max streaming service also as this subtitled Weird Western Tales. So apparently somewhere along the line this was always the subtitle, either that or maybe Kronos got into his time machine and has now affected our future here. So one or the other is probably possible. But Liam, before we get into our review this week, we will of course talk about it and get our official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, which aired back in January of, it was actually officially aired on the Cartoon Network here in the United States on January the 22nd, 2005, meaning we're just a few months here away from the 20-year anniversary of this episode's debut. And of course, the official IMDb synopsis is brought to you by The Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/The Pod Tower today and subscribe. And not only will you get all of our previous standard episodes that include lots of reviews of Batman the Animated Series all the way up through Batman Beyond, Justice League Unlimited, and so much more. But you also get our bonus episodes, some spin-off podcasts here that we've done that also Talk DCAU, but you also get the entire Tim Talk podcast library, as they did their own review of the DCAU and the ongoing series from our friends at Watchtower Database. Jump on the Bat-Wagon, all in one convenient streaming area. Head over to youtube.com/thepodtower today and subscribe.
That's right. So this is the synopsis for Once and Future Thing Part 1, sometimes called Weird Western Tales, written by Dwayne McDuffie, directed by Dan Reba, with music by our dynamic music partners, and animation by Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. Hope I can still do the voice. While pursuing a time-traveling thief, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern team up with a collection of DC Universe Western heroes to battle the villain controlling him.
He still got it, everyone. Never fear.
That's right.
A 2-week break didn't help him lose the magic. As far as our IMDb synopsis is concerned, I think it's okay. I feel like that last sentence ended with preposition, so maybe you don't. Maybe you get a couple points off for some grammatical errors here. But overall, not a terrible synopsis, all things considered. But we kick things off, Liam, in the future Gotham City, a detail that I had no recollection of noticing before. For some reason, I thought it was modern day DC Universe when we met our villain of the episode, but it is not. It is very clearly potentially Neo Gotham, future Batman Beyond era time frame, as we meet a man by the name of David Clinton, who is his wife is exploring his little man cave garage here, and she is fed up. And it's interesting because I feel like it's probably if you're an adult collector and you have anybody that you live with, a partner of some kind, you've probably had a similar interaction with them where they just don't understand all of the stuff that you have. They see it as junk taking up space and a complete mess, even though it's very clear that Mr. Clinton has all of his things in beautiful display cases under some really good lighting. But his wife does not care about that.
Look at this mess. Come on out, David. I know you're here.
Oh, hello, dear. I was just cataloging some of my collection.
Collection? Bunch of junk.
It's not junk. This comb belonged to Cleopatra. And this is an actual early draft of the Magna Carta. And this?
Right. Like you could afford these things on a physics professor's salary. We can't even afford the new car I want.
I didn't buy them, Enid. I sort of took them.
You robbed a museum? Is that why you're wearing that goofy catsuit?
Well, sort of. Not exactly. Remember last summer when I didn't get tenure?
Yeah, they thought you were crazy because you kept insisting you were on the verge of discovering time travel.
It's my chrono suit. I've had it working for months. I've been using it to gather treasures for my collection. And you said I was a loser.
She says it's all junk, and despite Mr. Clinton's objections, where he claims that they're actually all famous artifacts from various different eras. He has Cleopatra's comb. He has some other things. Yeah, she says that it's all junk, and he explains that while it's not junk, he says we get a little bit of exposition where he was up for some sort of award, and the reason why he didn't win it is because all of his peers thought he was crazy, and because of this, he reveals to her at this point that he obtained all of these artifacts not by robbing a museum, as she suggests, but as actually by using this time machine that he invented to go back in time and purloin some of these items. And her immediate reaction is not to be congratulatory over the fact that he created a time machine, but the fact that he created a time machine and is using it to collect historical junk, as she calls it. So she immediately starts yelling at him, berating him, telling him what a loser he is. She should have married whoever her mother told her, clearly some sort of rival to Mr. Clinton, that she made the wrong decision, who she married. He has all of this power, and he uses it to go back in time to create junk, or to grab junk. He exclaims that the reason why he isn't able to go and do anything and take anything of value, such as gold, jewels, or find potential stock information that he can use in the future, it's because he's afraid that if he does, he's going to mess up the time frame or the timeline. And by taking these things that nobody will miss, it doesn't really alter time whatsoever. So the wife Enid continues to berate him and tell him that he's worthless. At this point, David decides he's heard quite enough, and despite the fact that his time machine, in her eyes, is useless for anything of value since he refuses to use it that way, he says that he can do one great thing, and that is escape from her. So he throws on the machine, turns on the belt, and jumps into a time portal.
But you worthless, good-for-nothing, wretched waste of space! You invent a time machine and can't think of anything useful to do with it!
I can think of one thing. I can use it to get away from you!
And we are then flashed to the Watchtower in present day, where we see Batman and Jon Stewart having a meal together in the commissary. They're talking about their prospective love lives, as we see Shaira is there, and she's getting her meal, and she bumps into Diana. And there's a bit of a cold standoff here between the two of them. It's a little chilly, I'd say, to say the least, between the two femme fatales here. While they do speak, there's clearly some animosity still there and some unforgiveness from Diana towards Shaira. Batman notices it, and he mentions something to John about or John mentions that Diana is carrying a grudge against her. Batman inquires if John is carrying anything for her and towards her, and he brushes it off, initially saying no, he's forgiven her, and then kind of just he figures out that Batman's talking more potentially carrying a torch for her, as the saying would go, saying no, he's dating Vixen. Batman just stares at him and says, sure, after John continues to explain that he's moved on. But it's at that moment that John decides to turn the tables, says doesn't understand why they always talk about his love life. Let's talk about Batman and Diana together. Batman doing his best politician impersonation, I think, here, playing off any potential romance. He sees her completely as a professional. She's a wonderful person, but refuses to say that there's anything but a mutual respect between the two of them. And as Batman is saying all these very kind but platonic things about Wonder Woman, he realizes as he pauses that she's standing right behind him, and he's almost put his foot completely in his mouth at this point.
Anyway, why are we always talking about my love life? What's going on between you and Diana?
Nothing. She's a respected colleague.
Uh-huh.
I don't have time to pursue a relationship. My work is too important to allow any distractions. Diana's a remarkable woman. She's a valued friend. She's standing right behind me, isn't she?
Don't let that stop you. Keep digging. Intruder alert. Dormitory deck A. Intruder alert. Dormitory deck A.
It's at this point, though, however, they are interrupted as there's some watchtower alarms that go off, stating there's an intruder aboard the watchtower, and Batman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern all rush to see what's going on, and we see it is, in fact, our antagonist for the episode, Mr. Clinton, from the first scene. He's attempting to steal Batman's utility belt. He has a list of items that he's attempting to steal on this trip, and Batman's utility belt was the last one to grab. Just as he appears to have gotten away with it, he's stopped, however, by the three members of the Justice League. He exclaims that they're not supposed to know that he's there. This could be, threatening the timeline. He jumps into a time portal, and unfortunately, the Justice League follow him, and they awaken. And it's no longer a question of where they are, as Batman says, Liam, but as they arrive on a red, sun-soaked Western Front, they realize it is when they are. And as they see a group of outlaws approaching on horseback, And it appears that, in fact, they're not in Kansas anymore. I'll just say it that way.
That's right, and just to hammer home that they are not in the Watchtower, or in fact in the same time era anymore. They are accosted by a couple of rustlers. What are these guys?
Yeah,
Outlaws,
vagabonds.
Yes, but who quickly attempt to rob them, pulling guns, threatening them, and being a little bit, just for good measure, a little bit misogynistic to Wonder Woman, who quickly takes care of them and is almost amused by their attempts to fire upon her with her bracelets, which is a very funny gag as well. So they take care of the thugs, and knowing that they're now have to go find this mysterious time thief, they decide they need to do a little bit to blend in and not draw too much attention to themselves, as for fear that if the time thief saw them coming, that he would just run, and they could end up stranded there. So they take the clothes. Well, Batman and Diana take clothes from the outlaws that tried to rob them, and John has a magic ring, so he just makes his own cowboy outfit, which is pretty dope, honestly.
Super cool.
But yes, they arrive in town a little bit later. They head to a local saloon where we see a gentleman that we will come to know as Bartholomew Lash, or Bat Lash, is at a poker game with a certain Tobias Manning, who we find out is the new sheriff in town. And despite Bat Lash winning the hand, Tobias doesn't exactly want to pay up, and decides he's actually going to arrest him. He pulls a gun on him, and Batlash goes to pull his own gun, but it's revealed that Manning's packing a little bit more heat than Batlash's 6-shooter, as he has this weird futuristic gun that has like 9 bullets on it.
It's got like mechanical arms, robotic arms that all extend to make it, to give it a bunch of different angles to shoot from.
Yes, and as we find out later, it's a laser pistol. Diana points out that this must be from the future. And they also notice at that point that he's wearing the belt of the time thief as well.
Oh, 4 kings and an ace.
Well, now that's a mite perplexing, seeing as I got 4 aces and a king.
Well, I got the gun.
A lot of that going around lately. Seems like a waste of a good-sized pot. How about we split it and both walk away?
How about I keep it all?
Sounds fair the way you explain it.
The technology's from the future.
Wait. We don't know how things work here yet.
Hang him at dawn.
Don't I get a trial?
Sure. You're guilty. My town, my rules.
Wait a minute. Can't we talk about this? How about another hand? Double or nothing?
I think we know how things work here now.
So they sort of sit back and watch, not wanting to get involved yet without really understanding who the players are and what exactly is going on. So they see Batlash thrown in jail, and they're told that he's going to be hanging in the morning. So as Batlash tries to find a way out of his cell, we see that he has a cellmate who is none other than David Clinton, who informs him that the bars will hold long enough for him to be hanged in the morning. And at that point, the guard is accosted by a ghost from Scooby-Doo. Literally, I think this design is a Scooby-Doo ghost.
100%. Yeah.
But
that's literally what I wrote down in my notes.
like it's the one in like the Scooby-Doo where we never watched Scooby-Doo growing up, but like even I recognize this ghost. So
yes, for sure.
But anyway, yes, John, using his ring to make a construct, scares off the guard, and they make contact with Batlash, and he explains a little bit about the history of the town, and that Manning was an old outlaw who was kind of continuously run out by the old sheriff, but that suddenly he's been coming back with new technology, and now he kind of rules the town with an iron fist. I do love this guy that, as we'll find out, has like robot soldiers and robot dinosaurs and stuff, and super lasers and tanks. Like, I'm just gonna rule this town. That's the biggest. That's his biggest goal is just to be in charge of a town, which is, I feel like, very quaint for an Old West villain. But I love that. But yes, as they're discussing things, the identity is officially revealed that David is in fact in the cell, and that even though he was in the portal for only a second before Batman and the rest joined him, that by the time he exited the portal, it was 6 months prior to when Batman, Green Lantern, and Wonder Woman were dumped out. And so as soon as he got there, Tobias and his goons stole all of his future technology, and he's been making trips to the future since to get more technology and weaponry to hold on to his iron grip. And he notes that David is only still alive because some of the technology, he has to be there to teach him how to use it. Speaking of advanced technology, Bruce looks up and notices that there are security cameras that are watching their every move, and they realize that they're about to be in the middle of an ambush as several of Manning's goons show up with a lot of advanced weaponry, and kind of has them pinned down as Green Lantern tries to protect the rest of the building with a shield, but they're sort of outmatched and outgunned. But thankfully, as Batlash says, the cavalry arrives, and we have the rest of our secret, our weird Western tale warriors. I feel like this team does have a name in the comics, and I can't remember what it is.
It's not in the notes. At least it wasn't in the DCAU wiki, but it's essentially the Old West version of the Justice League.
Correct. So yes, we have Jonah Hex, of course, who we've previously seen in the Batman the Animated Series. So this is a younger version. It's very quickly it's very quick to note. He still has a lot more hair, but does have the same screwed up face. But yes, we see him. We see El Diablo, who is Zorro. And then we have the introduction of the sheriff, Ohayesa Smith, who we find out it was the old sheriff of Elkhorn, the town that Tobias Manning now rules. So the new and old Justice Leagues team up here and are able to finally fight off all of Manning's goons. And they decide they're going to unite and put their heads together and figure out and kind of make one final assault on Manning's compound and take care of this once and for all, knowing that both that as long as he has that time travel belt, that neither this town here in the Old West nor the Justice League themselves or David are safe. So they team up, and we get some really cool stuff that we're going to talk about in visuals and music in a minute here. As they team up and they ride on horseback. I don't know why John or Diana needed horses, other than it's cool. It's cool
I think part of it is, and it's kind of talked about in the dialogue, is they're aware that they could potentially screw up the timeline if too much is given. Okay. That's why, is it Jonah Hex that asks Bruce? No, somebody, I think Batlash asks them where they're from, and he said,
they say back east.
Right. Are you from back east? He says, sure. But then Jonah Hex clearly is onto it when he says, if I didn't know any better, I think you guys are time travelers. Alluding to his own, experience in time travel and stuff like that was in the comics. So yeah, I think that's probably part of it.
That's fair. So yes, they all ride in on horseback. As they're riding towards his compound, they are accosted by a gentleman on the back of a robot pterodactyl, to which my notes I just wrote, hell yeah. Yeah. Diana takes care of that, and they continue their quest towards the building. They're accosted by a bunch of robot soldiers, and Bruce kind of swings into battle first and takes out and disarms a few of them with his batarangs. And finally, Jonah and Green Lantern and the rest join the fray. And it's just like, there's a lot more than just fancy guns that this team of villains has. And we get some giant robots. We get tanks. There's all kind of crazy stuff. It's a very action heavy stuff, so we'll go over it more in visuals and detail. But as they continue their fight, we kind of get to this moment where it looks like they have Manning dead to rights after they've taken care of all of his goons. He pulls out his fancy gun with the 9 different nozzles, whatever. What's the front of a gun? Barrels. Not a gun guy, if that's not painfully obvious.
The gun nozzle.
That's the way I've described guns in this episode. Not a knowledgeable fella in that field. I will admit that. But yes, they so all six of them team up to disarm his gun, which is great. And then we get it kind of comes down to an old fashioned, appropriate for the Western, comes down to kind of a final showdown between Ohayesa Smith and Manning, as of all things, Manning tries to escape on a robot Pegasus.
Yes, that's right. And just as Batman as John Green Lantern is about to step in to assist, it is in fact actually Jonah Hex who intervenes and says that Ohayesa needs to kind of win this battle on his own for his own honor. He talked about being disrespected by Tobias's, and overtaking his town. So it is sort of that old Western flavor of the sheriff needs to get his groove back, I guess. I don't know. But ultimately that's definitely not an Old West saying. But they are ultimately the sheriff jumps on the back of the Pegasus. They crashes the Pegasus down. He's able to disable any additional weapons that Tobias Manning has, and it comes down to just an old fashioned fist fight. Of course, Tobias breaks out a knife, but he's quickly done away with, and Ohayesa brings him to justice, fully prepared to bring him back to justice at that point. So the all is well, and all seems to be well, as Batman also in the fight after disabling Tobias, Ohayesa was able to grab the time machine belt and get it back to Batman. So just as it appears that the Justice Leaguers are about to return to their true time with Mr. Clinton, Batman, unfortunately, I don't know. This is a weird moment for Batman, who should seemingly always be on guard, especially when this person is clearly potentially unstable. But he allows Mr. Clinton, close enough to touch the belt. He pushes a button on it, which causes the belt to electrocute Batman, knocking him unconscious, giving Clinton the ability to grab the belt and jump into another time portal.
Oh, you forgot to reset the compensator. Here, let me. Or maybe I'm lying.
Huh. We've been expecting you.
But I bet you weren't expecting us. Static? What's going on?
Dad?
And the rest of the Leaguers disappear into the portal, leaving our old-time Western heroes in the dust, so to speak, and to sort of rub their chins. We flash forward, though, into the future, where we've arrived and landing on the top of a building. It is a very familiar sight, as we see a futuristic Gotham City as the landing point for our heroes. And who is there waiting for them but a group of Jokers? We see Bonk, Chucko, Dee Dee, Ghoul, and Woof. Of course, the Jokers from the Return of the Joker movie. And just as they're about to begin fighting our Leaguers, another group of heroes arrives, and it's, of course, the futuristic Batman. It is Static, Old Man Static at that, and Warhawk, all arriving on the building. And immediately Jon Stewart recognizes Static and calls him out and asks him what's going on. And then we see Warhawk call out to Jon and say, "Dad?" And then we get our to be continued bit here. So it is certainly going to be an interesting place to pick up next week with next week's episode, as we have an interesting cliffhanger here for our part one. So Liam, we can, as we've want to do as of recently, when we've split up our two-parters here, we'll give a placeholder scorecard for the entire episode, since we've scored all two-parters kind of together with one single part. We'll give our final scorecard next week once we review part two. But let's talk about our plot here. I mean, as far as cartoon fans, comic book fans, time travel where you see heroes interacting with people that they otherwise would never interact with in unique situations are always a lot of fun. I think because the rules are just suspended, and ever more so in this case where you have the mishmashing of technology and all of that, you really have a lot of fun and play fast and loose with any rules that you would otherwise have to follow. So I think with that, there's almost an expectation that the creativity has to be just, above and beyond, because you don't have any rules at this point. You've set the rules that there are no rules. So let's make it as wild and wacky and crazy as possible. And while initially off the bat, things kind of seem to follow they're just going in the past. It's the modern Justice League in the Old West that quickly unravels here as we learn that the technology has been transported back and all of that. So we have, it quickly and quite absurdly escalates at points, I would say. As you mentioned, we go from a guy with a extendo arm revolver with laser guides on it to, holy cow, there's a guy riding the back of a robotic pterodactyl, and then another guy riding a robotic Pegasus, and another guy riding like another dinosaur of some kind. Like, we have dinosaur robots, we have exoskeleton robots wearing top hats and monocles that are shooting their revolvers at the Justice League, and all in this sort of fanciful realistic setting of an 1890s or 1870s Oklahoma. So it is wild and wacky, and it's a goofy story that I think it feels like it especially with where we end up at the end of the episode. We're in the past, we go to the future. We know that next week's episode is going to be a fun one to talk about for a bunch of different things, but revisiting these old Western heroes that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to kind of work into a story unless you did something similar to this, or if you did something similar to how they used Jonah Hex in the Batman the Animated Series, which that would have been hard to replicate. I feel like the execution for this is very fun. It makes a lot of sense. If you just suspend the disbelief and realize there just really aren't any rules based on the story that they're telling. So, I mean, it's a fun story. Dwayne McDuffie knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote this tale. That you just, at some point, you just kind of have to start being absurd. And it's just like, well, what else, what other crazy stuff can we include in this final battle between our heroes? And while still having the underlying story of, this somewhat, he's not really even a mad scientist at the beginning. He's just a guy that created an invention that feels like he's not appreciated. So he's just using it for fun. And then when his wife kind of just pushes him over the edge and insults him one too many times, he decides he's going to stand up to being bullied at this point, but he just kind of messes it up in the process. And it isn't until the very end where he's kind of like, he really reveals that he's up to no good. I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun from start to end, even if it is absurd and some of the elements are crazy at times.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You do kind of portray David as almost this kind of sad sack loser in the first half, where you're almost supposed to feel sorry for him, and then so when he has that villainous twist at the last minute, I think it's a fun little twist, and it sets up obviously what we'll get to next week with part two, where he is more of a mastermind. I think that's really good. The episode itself, this definitely feels like a we think this might be it. We're nearing the end of the run here, so let's find some characters that we always wanted to use. We talked about that when we had Kevin Altieri on to discuss the other Jonah Hex episode, Showdown, where it's like we're getting near the end of this run. What's something we always wanted to do? And he always wanted to do a Jonah Hex story. So I think that's kind of what it felt as far as like who we get as far as these Old West characters that show up. I think at the end of the day, I think it's an excuse just to use some of those characters that they had never gotten to play with before and didn't really have an occasion to play with because all their stories are kind of set in the Old West. So as far as the device to get there, it's fine. Magic guy has a magic belt that travels through time.
Right.
That's fine. It's not the most enthralling impetus for an episode, but it's fun. And obviously we get the little character beats at the start with John and Batman comparing love lives or lack thereof in Batman's case, I guess. But I think there's some fun character beats of seeing. I think that's one of the strengths of a lot of Dwayne McDuffie scripts, especially as the shows went on here, like towards the end of that second season of Justice League and into the Unlimited run, is like when the original 7 are together, whatever 7 of them are, however many of them are paired together for one of these episodes, the way they talk to each other feels very familiar. And so I found myself being like very charmed by how they all speak to each other. And like they talk to each other like peers and friends. And it doesn't feel so robotic. This doesn't feel like an episode of Super Friends where everybody's lines could have been said by any of the other ones and it wouldn't have mattered, like
for sure.
It's not generic dialogue. So I appreciated that as well. So I think this is a pretty good first chapter. It's a lot of fun. The weird wacky. I do like that at the end it comes down to a knife fight in the desert. Like after all the wackiness, like it still has to, the Western side of the story kind of comes through, and we get a resolution to this story of the sheriff and Tobias Manning, finally having it out once and for all is pretty good. So I appreciated that element of it too. But after week 1, I think I'm sitting around a 7 out of 10 for my plot score.
Nice. Yeah. My placeholder thus far is an 8 out of 10. So I just want one more. I feel like as far as the villain selection too, and as we've already stated, he's not really fully the antagonist in the first episode here, but using Kronos, who's a Justice League sort of somewhat I would classify him as a classic Justice League villain, but doing the DCAU thing where they put their own spin on the character, which, man, it's funny nowadays how many people get all uptight or all up in arms over any time a creator or somebody that's working takes a character and decides to put their own spin on it. And people are like, well, you can't do that. That's not how the character is supposed to be. And it's like, honestly, and we interact obviously with a lot of people that are fans of the DCAU. With the recent Batman Caped Crusader release, there were some changes in classic villains and how they were portrayed and different. And there were a lot of people that had issues with that. The irony is that the thing that they're comparing it to so often, the DCAU, Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, did that all the time. And this is a case where Kronos was like not characterized as this sad sack from the future that decided to act, that sort of stumbled into his supervillainy. Like, he's very much like a 60s or 70s comic book villain who, has the ability to slow down time and can, manipulate time and whatever, but it is not this as his origin. So the fact that they took this, put their own stamp on it, and then figured out a way, as you mentioned, to use some of these characters that they may not have previously had available to do, because we know that by this point, Justice League Unlimited, you're able to use some of these other characters that maybe had copyright issues or media rights issues and all of that. So you're using some of these characters that were likely impactful to the people that worked on this show that had an appreciation for it and were like, hey, let's use some of these characters. Let's go back to the Jonah Hex character, but let's also use the El Diablo character and the, Ohayesa Smith character, who are also like real characters from the 60s and 70s, that had their own runs in comics. So, I love that. I love that they were able to kind of find a way to do that and still include our heroes. Our heroes, ultimately the culmination of the episode, with Ohayesa Smith getting his revenge against our true antagonist, Tobias Manning, for the episode. It kind of steals the spotlight a little bit, but because our heroes really aren't involved with that, but our heroes still play a big part in helping these old Western heroes, bring the bad guy to justice. So I like it. It's fun. Time travel feels like a cheat code a lot of times, but it certainly is not something that I feel like was overused, and especially in this, when we know that what came in the next season was very much grounded in reality and espionage and government overreach and all the stuff that happens with the Cadmus story arc. So this one being like a fanciful wrap up to this season of like, we're just throwing everything out there. I think it's a fun episode. Good start to it. We'll see how it wraps up next week, but still pretty high scores from both of us when it comes to plot. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be animation and visuals. Dongyang Animation Studio responsible for this week's episode, as we mentioned. Friend of the show, Dan Reba, responsible for directing the episode. And here's a fun fact that I had no idea about either, but according to the DCAU wiki, a friend of the show, Kevin Altieri, also worked on some of the boards for this episode, I believe, which I had no recollection or understanding of. That might be something we want to check out with Kevin to see if that's accurate or not. But according to the DCAU wiki, friend of the show Kevin Altieri did some storyboarding for this episode. So maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. We'll follow up with that next week. Perhaps we'll get a comment from Mr. Altieri himself. But as far as animation and visuals, Liam, as we mentioned at the top, you kind of have an interesting start to the episode where it takes place in the future. There's a couple of hints that it's future Gotham based on the vehicles and the stuff that are in and around what we see, but most of it takes place in this little garage. It is I believe, a CGI time portal that's used, which it's there. It blends in okay, like it's fine. It differentiates itself from the boom tube, I guess. As far as Kronos's look, as we mentioned, it's much more, it's less cartoony bad guy. I remember the Justice League Adventures tie-in comic, Kronos, prior to this, and he was much more his like golden age look or silver age look, I guess, where he's like a guy in spandex with like a white mask, and he's got this big collar, cape, and all this stuff, and a giant clock on his chest. He looks very different than what we end up seeing here, which is a futuristic guy who's just in sort of like a jumpsuit. He's got goggles, and he kind of looks like Kite Man, to be honest. He's got goggles and his time belt, and that's about it. Like he doesn't quite resemble that classic Kronos look here, which I think that would be a little bit out of place and ridiculous as far as things go, since he's not straight up one-to-one a villain at the beginning here. He's just a guy who happens to have created a time machine. So I'm okay with him not having that old-timey Silver Age look as far as what the story was going for. I feel like it sets up the ultimately when he completely loses it and decides he's going to go off the deep end and turn villainous, it kind of makes that a little bit, not that you couldn't see it coming, but I guess, ultimately, like it makes it a little more subtle once he does kind of complete the turn there.
Yeah, I think that totally works, especially because the whole idea, at least when we first meet him, is that he is trying to kind of go unnoticed. And so you could it's future-y, but it could be like a maintenance uniform or a hazmat uniform if you weren't paying attention, or like it's not a particularly like eye-catching piece of clothing, which seems like by design because of what he's looking to steal. So yeah, I think that works just fine. I think in part two he does. I think the color palette at least changes, and I think maybe they give him like the emblem on his chest, so they give you a little bit of that. But yeah, I think for part one and before he sort of embraced his time lord megalomania at the start of the episode, it makes a lot of sense for him to just kind of be in a jumpsuit with goggles in this case. So I don't think we lost anything by not getting, even though again I have a little bit of a soft spot for that, for any kind of wacky like 60s or 70s design like that, just because it's so fun and over the top. But yeah, other visuals, I love our Western Justice League characters are all a blast. I think El Diablo probably the most striking. Just because he is basically Zorro, but he has sort of like the cool goatee, and he has the red mask and the whip and everything. I think is tremendous, the way he kind of swings around with it and kind of uses it. That's really his only weapon that we see him using. So maybe El Diablo, my favorite part. Seeing Jonah Hex back, delightful. I remember this is one I really like, can put myself in my like whatever I would have been 12-year-old brain and remember watching this the first time and being so excited that Jonah Hex was in the cartoon again and things like that. So I this is a younger version, and we'll get to it in voice acting. I think they did a good enough job of matching up. This is what a younger version of that guy we saw that looked like Governor Jesse Ventura in Batman the Animated Series. Look like this fits.
Yeah,
so I think they did a good job of matching that up. He still has kind of the vaguely he doesn't have the big overcoat, but he still has his Civil War fatigues on, and
he's a lot bulkier too.
Yes.
Like he's definitely, like as you mentioned, he's clearly younger than when we see him in the Showdown episode, as that was supposed to be sort of his. He's well into his 70s at that point or whatever. He's lived a hard life. So this is definitely younger, probably 30s, 40s, maybe. Definitely broader. He's still got color in his hair, which is great. But he's definitely he's a beefy boy in this episode, to say the least. Like he was lifting some cattle or something. I don't know.
Yeah, he's like old West buff. Like
for sure.
Really, again, perfectly fits a Bruce Timm design, just big barrel chested man. But I like all of the designs of our past heroes. Getting our modern heroes in the costumes is great. A note that I think is in the DCAU wiki, but that I had kind of forgotten. They give Bruce his blue eyes back that he had in New Batman Adventures. I think in Starcrossed he just had the regular black eyes, and old Bruce Wayne always had the black eyes too. But in TNBA, for whatever reason, he had just like bright blue eyes for that whole run. So it's kind of an interesting stylistic choice to bring that back for this one. But
I think it had something to do with the fact that he was his whole getup is he's wearing a black hat with a black jacket. I mean, it's the Batman costume just in cowboy form. So it's maybe it was just a stylistic choice to make it stand out a little bit. I love, there's a bit that as they they're stealing the costumes from the guys that attempted to jump them, John offers Batman or Bruce a gun, which he declines, and instead we see later on that he's got the utility belt. He's wearing the utility belt underneath of his duster instead, which is just a great bit that pays off later on.
Absolutely, yes. The "Go ahead, make my day" line where he pulls out the batarangs. Also,
I think all of our heroes get get sort of like the under the brim look also. There's like one or two,
Mhm.
just like a classic Western trope where the camera pans down from the brim and you just see their eyes peek out from underneath of it a little bit. I think all of our
Mhm.
heroes at one point get a chance to do that, which is a nice cinematic touch and homage to old Western shows and movies.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of that. Yeah, the when they all join forces, we'll talk about this more in music in a second here, but they all kind of walk through town in a row, and they're kind of posed like the Justice League and at the beginning of the old Justice League intro. Very cool. And then the transition to them riding the horses down the hill, and then as we said, all the crazy, the robots and the dinosaurs and the mech suits and the Pegasus and all the crazy guns. Like, just an incredible job just from like a character and prop design standpoint alone. This was just such a smorgasbord of cool designs and fun ideas. Like we said, just them really emptying the holster, so to speak, on kind of, I think, every fun idea they had for either a character for like an old West story that they could think of. So a lot of like the thugs are even kind of interesting. They're all kind of like missing teeth, or they have like real ragged facial hair, or their eyes are kind of like looking in two different directions. Like they're a little bit like all of Manning's henchmen have like very unique looks to them too. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them are based on actors from those old Westerns, but yeah, there's just so much fun from a design standpoint before we even get into the animation and stuff of it. But that's also, I think, pretty strong job from Dong Yang on this one as far as the animation. The bit of Diana flying up through the wing of the pterodactyl, I think, is awesome. We already mentioned like the ghost that John makes, but always got to point out when John makes constructs because it happens so rarely. But that whole sequence where the Western heroes first debut kind of at night, and they're coming up from behind, and we kind of have a moment with each of them where they kind of reveal themselves and then do their thing, is a lot of fun as well, as a way to introduce us to all of these characters. And as we mentioned, the plot, we're juggling a lot of characters here. So the fact that everybody kind of gets, as you mentioned, at least a visual moment of or an action beat of their own is again a testament to Dan Reba as the director of this episode, and our storyboard artists who timed everything out and made sure everyone got their kind of visual flair in. Really just a lot of fun all the way around.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say, as far as character models are concerned, this is an episode where I thought a lot of people looked a little bit wonky. Everybody's very angular in this. There's another episode, I can't remember which, maybe kids stuff. But there's a couple of episodes in this run, and I think in the second season also, where for whatever reason, I guess it's whatever artists were doing the animation or whatever storyboard artists were working on the actual boards, but everybody's just very angular and sort of their proportions are just a little bit stretched out, I'd say, a little bit. So there are periods where people look a little off model. Now, as we've talked about before, the consistency throughout the episode sort of takes precedence over whether or not it completely matches the model that we prefer, because obviously the storyboard artists that worked on these differ from episode to episode, series to series. So we tend to place more value on, is there a consistency throughout the episode when we're giving our score versus, does it match up to what I prefer my character to look like, or is it, completely distracting? I would say it's not distracting to the point where it takes you out of the episode, but there are a couple of noticeable bits when Batman and John are sitting at the table eating. Some of the expressions Batman makes, that like his head is kind of shaped a little weird. Some of the facial expressions that some of the characters make later on, it just looks different than it's less squared off. It's less and more like angular almost, I'd say, is just the word that I used to describe it. So
Yeah.
not my favorite as far as the way that the episode looks in that form, but I would say at least it's consistent from start to finish with how people look.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, overall, I ended up settling for week one. I settled on a pretty strong 8 out of 10 for my visual score. Yeah, I think there's, like I said, just so much fun from a design standpoint, that it was hard. Like I just got lost in that. Like,
yeah,
and just so many fun, wacky ideas. Being like, yeah, okay, there's robot cowboys, and like all the robots have like hats and
mustaches, and
yes, they're so funny. Like it's
monocles.
Yes, it's so like there's like little bits of character. The design of like those mech suits that the guys are in are fun. And
we didn't even talk about
there's like, because they show them in the cockpits. They're in like these big glass domes, and there's like these 2 giant levers that they steer the arms with, and then you see one of the guys is like pedaling really fast to move the legs. So there's like a steampunk element, like kind of old school mechanical version, even though it's this like super futuristic robot, which I was like, that's a clever idea, because you're like, well, you have to make a thing, even if it's futuristic, that a guy from 1860 whatever could still understand how to operate. So
right.
I kind of appreciated like the more mechanic, like they showed you like mechanically how they were operating these things.
Yeah,
I thought was a really clever visual nod as well. But yeah, that whole sequence there, Jean like cuts one up with his ring, and Diana smashes one, and I think it's El Diablo takes care of the other one. So it's like everybody kind of getting their own little visual little bits there. But yeah, there's so much fun in the design there. The bit where all 6 of them blow up Tobias's gun at once is again kind of a classic Western thing. Like you get this like side profile shot of them all standing in a line, and then they all draw their various weapons to take out the bits is fun. So yeah, just a lot of little things again with the timing and everything that I think they did a great job on. So yeah, as of now, and we'll see through part 2, but an 8 out of 10 for me so far.
Yeah, I went just 1 point lower, 7 out of 10. I don't think that there's a cause for a disagreement alarm, especially when it's not our final scores yet. But yeah, I just think, like I said, the models themselves aren't my favorite models, so that probably took me out of it a little bit. It probably would have weighed a little bit heavier if not for the fantastical third act. It's nonstop action. I also do love the sort of juxtaposition between, we get the Smith giving you the flashback to how Tobias Manning took over his town, which is the classic story trope of a sepia-toned flashback that we have, and it's rather violent. At times we see closed fists to the face and some really maniacal looking faces that Tobias is clearly taking enjoyment out of beating the snot out of the sheriff here, and that sort of juxtaposed with our final battle here, where we get a closed fist to the face of Tobias Manning from Sheriff Smith after he sort of insults him with this demeaning nickname. So it's a lot of fun. I think it's really good for the most part. So far, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. Those are still pretty high scores. We'll see once we are in our futuristic Neo Gotham, which, talk about juxtaposition. You go from this bright sort of orange color for the majority of the episode, this bathed Western sunset town, old Western look, to of course, the futuristic Neo Gotham that's just black on black on black on black, like pitch black everything. And then, it's really, really dark. It's nighttime. We have these creepy looking jokers who, some of the changes we see to them that are different than the last time we saw them in the Return of the Joker movie. And we'll talk about that next week, I'm sure. And then, of course, Batman, Batman showing up. We have Warhawk showing up, and a different futuristic Static, which there is a futuristic Static that we've seen, or we haven't seen it yet because we haven't covered the episode, but does appear in the Static Shock show. But this is an even older version of this Static character. So lots of things to sort of, and you only get this brief little, I don't know, 20-second scene before we cut the episode off. So I can just imagine, and I kind of remember the first time that I saw this episode, you get that little bit as your cliffhanger, and you're just like, what? No! Like, that's the end of the episode. Like, tremendous hook for next week's episode. Like, well done. That probably goes back to plot more than anything, but the visual also, though, of you're returning to this world that at this time you hadn't been in for a couple years at this point. So you're returning, seeing these characters, seeing Warhawk and Static and Terry all show up.
And even that reveal of the Jokers, like you hear Bonk, I think, his voice first, and they all kind of look over and they all sort of step out of silhouette. And you're like, oh, and there's like a moment of like, oh my gosh. And then Static and Batman and Warhawk show up, and you're like, oh, it's happening. Like, it's like you have that moment of realization there. Then you get the bomb dropped of, ending on John's shocked face as he hears the word dad as you fade to black. It's like, oh my gosh, what a great visual and story hook to come back next week.
Agreed. Yeah, it's going to be awesome to talk about that next week. So can't wait to do that. But of course, before we do that, Liam, we have two more categories to talk about. And of course, the next one is going to be our music, provided again this week by our dynamic music partners. There's one that you already mentioned, Liam. I'll let you take that in just a moment here. As far as the other musical notes that I sort of wrote down and noted, we get some of the Wonder Woman theme used here a little bit. I feel like El Dorado El Diablo gets his own theme sort of riff as he kind of saves the day in the middle of the battle. A couple of our Old West Justice Leaguers sort of get their own themes.
Yeah, Ohayesa Smith gets like a flute or something, like which I guess is kind of like a Native American wood instrument used to indicate when he shows up, and then you get like that very strong like Spanish guitar riff acoustic guitar riff when El Diablo shows up.
Yeah. And of course, the DCAU wiki would be remiss not to point out that I think when they go into the saloon the first time and they see Batlash playing poker with Tobias Manning, the music in the background is a reused piano old Western theme from the one of the Leitner episodes of Superman the Animated Series, which featured a bit where he goes into where Superman walks into a old Western themed part that Leitner has created.
That's right.
So always love a good reused theme there. It probably was just like, hey, we don't need to we use this little musical bit for approximately 14 seconds. We'll use it again here. It's an old time Western piano. Let's just go ahead and plug it in here. And if somebody is wise enough to think or to notice this and write it on a website 20 years from now, so be it. But as far as memorable musical moments, though, you already sort of mentioned it, but there is one prominent one that matches with the visuals that you already mentioned. Is just, man, it's essentially like the moment in the Avengers movie where the Avengers assemble, where it's just like, this is for the fans at home to appreciate. It's a super meta thing that you will, if you'll appreciate it. Otherwise, it just sort of looks like a general, a transition scene, a travel scene from our heroes to get from point A to point B. But clearly, a lot of visual and musical homages to things that are easily recognizable for us super fans.
fancy gun belt you got there. I'm thinking you folks are time travelers.
Where would you get a crazy idea like that?
Experience? I've had an interesting life.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, the standout sequence definitely is the moment, as we mentioned, when the heroes of two eras come together. They're all walking, as I said, posed exactly how the League is posed at the start of the original Justice League intro, and then we get in a very Old West style, the good, the bad, and the ugly style of music. We get the Lolita Ritmanis's Justice League theme, which itself is based on an old Western theme. I think we discovered a few years ago. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. We will research that, and I will say it next week. So that's the listener's job to hold me to that, because I will forget. But anyway, but yes, that's so I think getting to hear it in that way is great. And then you get that moment, and then it transitions into them riding on horseback, and they bring in, kind of the chorus of the theme, for lack of a better term. And it just sounds great. And it's such a great moment. I think I rewound it like 3 times, and I just kept watching it because I just loved it so much. It's maybe one of the best Justice League Unlimited musical moments I can remember,
for sure.
Just because, like you said, not just that, but the fact how it pairs with the visuals, and then that old Justice League theme didn't get that much use once they transitioned to Unlimited. So, and we're used to the electric guitar music mostly anyway. So, just a great bit of music to use that theme there. We also get like old Westy versions of the Shirley Walker Batman theme and Wonder Woman's theme as well. So they do a great job of mixing in a lot of the hero themes, and like we already said, all of the old West heroes get their own little musical nods as well. So, and even the moment, I think when the outlaws first accost them, when they first come through the portal, like as soon as Wonder Woman kind of springs into action and flies off to catch them, we get this like very grand like dun 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 dun. Like it's very, they go right into that like old West style of music that I think just works so well. It really sets the tone for what the rest of the episode is going to be musically. That the good guy cowboy theme that kind of carries the rest of the episode. So I think they do some really, really creative stuff. And then right at the end, when we transfer into the future and the Jokers walk out of the shadow, we get right away, it's electric guitar, like that waning, like single note that kind of echoes is right there. So the transition, as soon as we're in a different era, is pulled off really well as well. So there's just a lot to appreciate about the music in this one.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And it's interesting, as you mentioned, like I think we were used to the music sort of, I don't want to say taking a back seat, because Justice League Unlimited had a very signature sound to it with the electric guitar and a lot of that playing into many of the episodes. And, when it called for it, there were certainly musical moments that were memorable, especially as we headed into season 2. But those specific moments where the music was sort of the main character had sort of taken a back seat for the better part of the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited run. It just wasn't used in the same way, I feel like. So the fact that this episode and this sequence, the visuals and the music work together to pay homage to, if we're yeeing our last haw, this is one to go out on here with a homage to ourselves and a nod to the original Justice League intro with the music and the visual sequences. And it's just cool. Like it's completely. Absolutely. Like, did they need a montage of them? No, absolutely not. But it's very cool, and I'm very glad that our director and writer included this, and our dynamic music partners were able to put that Western theme on that classic theme song that means so much to us. So as far as my score thus far, It's sitting at a 10 out of 10 just for that sequence. We'll see if that holds through next week. I'm interested. I have not watched either of these episodes for several years, so I'm interested to see with the futuristic world of Batman Beyond, what we get as far as the music there. That obviously traditionally was a little bit more similar to the Justice League Unlimited sound with the electric guitar and percussion and all of that's used. So we'll see if it differentiates itself or feels like a melding of the two styles in any way. So I'm excited to see what we get for next week. But for now, my score is definitely a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I have no choice but to agree with you here. I think that moment alone is so great that it might get you to a 9 or a 10 on its own, like you said. But I was so enthralled with the music all the way through this. Like I said, as soon as we get to the Old West, it just transitions perfectly, and it doesn't feel jarring, even though it's really not standard fare for our JLU stuff. And again, even the transition to the Beyond style music at the end is it's a way for our composers here, our dynamic music partners, to really flex their creative muscles as composers. So just a tremendous job all the way through here so far. So we'll be interested to see if that holds up when we're in the future for most of next week's episode.
That's right. And Liam, that will bring us to our final category for part 1. And that, of course, will be voice acting with as many characters as we had on screen. While some of them do double duty, that means we have a rather large voice cast to cover for this week. So without further ado, we'll talk about the voice actors and actresses for this week's episode.
That is right. We got a giant cast to talk about here.
Just
Cal.
crazy.
So if I skip over someone or only give brief talks, that's why. But yeah, briefly, right at the end of the episode, we do have Peter Onorati returning as Warhawk. Again, just a great mind-blowing moment for the show there.
He really says dad in a way that really makes you feel. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously we'll get more from next week's performance, but not a ton for him to do this week.
Yeah. We'll get back to him next week for sure. Mindy Sterling is playing Enid. I like it in 2040, whatever, or 50 years from now, whenever now is in the future. Enid is still a name somehow.
Yeah.
Because that's the name of an old 50s sitcom battle axe of a wife who nags her husband, right? It's like, of course she's named Enid.
100%.
But we have Mindy Sterling. Folks, but you'd know her. I think most people would know her if you saw her. She's I think a pretty famous, pops up on a lot of sitcoms, was in Austin Powers, and has done a lot of voice acting work herself. So very small role, but she's quite she plays her part very well.
Oh yeah, I would not want to be married to her.
I was gonna ask if this raised any real life comparisons to your action figure collection, but your wife is a saint, so I don't think that's unlikely to happen. But,
absolutely.
But anyway, but yes, elsewhere we have Ed O. Ross, who folks might remember from the Lethal Weapon movies as Tobias Manning. I mean, he does his part. He's the mustache twirling outlaw.
Quite literally.
Yeah. I think my favorite line is when they blow up, when they all hit his gun at once and it blows up and he just goes, "My gun!"
That I wrote that line down. It's very funny. It's right there with my stockpiles as far as funny exclamation 2-word sentences and the delivery behind them.
Absolutely.
All working together to be very funny.
Absolutely. And then we have our past Justice Leaguers. We have Jonathan Joss as Ohayesa Smith, aka Powwow Smith, which I think was his name in the comics. And I think they allude to that in the scene with Manning. We have Adam Baldwin, who had already...
Before we move on from Mr. Joss, he also, so he is, and we've talked about this before, how I think modern day it's become more in the forefront of I would say, I guess Hollywood, but certainly there are a large contingency of people that prefer, if you're going to have a character that is a particular race or from a particular country, that you cast somebody that is represents that rather than whitewashing or whatever the term would be. So interestingly, Mr. Joss is a Native American, and he famously played, if you've ever watched King of the Hill, he played a Native American, John Redcorn, who's a pretty funny character in that show. He also played that character. So that, if you're a fan of King of the Hill, you've ever watched that, I think I think that's also getting a revival at some point.
I believe it is.
So I don't know if that character will be returning or not, but Mr. Joss, very notable as that character who was a pretty important character during that season, or that show's original run.
Absolutely. And then elsewhere, as mentioned, we have Adam Baldwin.
Name that Baldwin.
That's right. From Full Metal Jacket fame. Also, I guess in episode order, it hasn't happened yet, but he's also Rick Flag a few episodes later.
Mm-hmm. He played Sven also in the Zeta Project. Who could forget?
That's right, of course, Sven. But yes, yeah, he is. I like him. Like I said, I think he matches up pretty well with our old Jonah Hex actor. You know, it's not like a really over the top like Texas accent or anything, but he's got the twang and he's got this real kind of deep, commanding voice. And again, yeah, he has some pretty funny lines. As again, we don't know exactly what he's seen or not seen, but he obviously knows about time travel. And then he has a line at one point where they're talking about I think Batlash is like, oh, I got to get me one of those laser guns, and he's like, don't trust them, they jam on you or something.
Yeah.
Like, what has this guy been doing? Like, but it's just a fun little quirk, a little quirk and bit of color that they threw on, even though he didn't necessarily get that many lines. And he also voices Bonk at the end, so double duty for Mr. Baldwin. Speaking of Batlash, we have Ben Browder, who kind of, I feels like the king of, and this is not, I don't say this to be an insult, but like B tier or maybe C tier sci-fi. Was on several episodes of Farscape as well as Stargate SG-1. So those are shows I have heard of, but I couldn't tell you a thing about them. But it looks like he was on quite a few episodes of both. So I'm sure he is an absolute legend in certain circles. But he probably gets the most play of any of our past heroes, just because he's the first one we meet, and we meet him right away. And yeah, he's kind of he's a hero, but he's like a little bit of a cad. Like, we see him, I mean, it's not really a vocal note, but he knocks out a guy and then takes money out of his wallet at one point. And yeah, he has kind of this feeling that he kind of talks himself into trouble because he's got such a smart mouth. So I think he does a good job. Like, he's kind of that kind of lovable rogue, but he's at the end of the day, he does the right thing, but he's also kind of he's not a white knight either.
Yeah, I don't think he did anything bad. I feel like he undersold a lot of and that may have just been the direction. Like, he's just kind of this laissez-faire, just whatever, go with the flow. Nothing really phases him, even though he's experiencing all this crazy stuff happening around him. He does sort of, especially in the scene against where he's playing poker against Tobias Manning, he's just sort of matter of fact when he catches him cheating. So I guess maybe that's the character. He's just supposed to be the laid back guy that isn't really fazed by anything. And I guess that comes off in the performance, but some of it makes the character's performance feel like a little lazy in and of itself. Like, there's not a ton of emotion that's shown. And I feel like maybe I wanted more of the character. Like, the other characters, El Diablo doesn't have a lot of dialogue to give. We don't get a lot of emotion shown from our Jonah Hex either. So I feel like one of those characters maybe should have been a little bit more animated, pun intended. And I didn't quite get that from from Mr. Browder's performance. So again, that might not be likely not his fault, and maybe just something that the story called for. We're just having these guys. We don't want to distract from what's happening on the screen, so everybody's just kind of going to be understanding and not necessarily terrified of what's going on around them. So not my favorite performance of the episode, but certainly did the job as an okay lead for a lot of the episode. He does have a lot of dialogue
for sure. And speaking of El Diablo, we have Nestor Carbonell playing him. You might know him as the mayor in the Dark Knight films, or maybe more memorably, he had quite a long turn on Lost, as well as the Bates Motel television series, and has done quite a bit of voice acting in his time as well. Like you said, doesn't really say a lot, but he gets the fun intro. Again, he's Zorro. Like that's the bit. I don't know if they specifically were like talk like Antonio Banderas, but I feel like that's the vibe. That like just be Zorro, and he does it. He does a great job. He just doesn't have a lot to do, as mentioned.
He to me, he will always be Batman from the live action Tick series.
Yes, absolutely. What a pull. Not the Amazon one that people like. No,
the Patrick Warburton original failed like 7 episode or whatever it was, 8 episodes, which honestly was a fun. Like, I haven't watched it since in 15, 20 years probably, but I did watch it and thought it was quite enjoyable and Patrick Warburton. Anyway, we're off on a tangent. Sorry. That's nothing about Mr. Carbonell's performance here today.
Yes, but and then we have our villain of the piece, as he's revealed lately to be a full-on villain. We have playing David Clinton, aka Kronos. We have Peter McNicol. Crazy IMDb page. Was a long-running character on Ally McBeal. He was in the film Sophie's Choice, and he also voices the Mad Hatter in the Arkham games. So some other voice acting to his credit, but I think he does a good job as far as playing, like, again, he's just kind of this weird, awkward nerd when we first meet him, and then he kind of panics, and then at the end, he's not really at the forefront of this episode, because you're waiting for that big villainous turn at the end, but you're like, when he hits the button and he electrocutes Batman, you're like, oh, that little weasel. Like, and he has his little villain laugh as he jumps through the portal or whatever. It's like, oh, that little weasel. Like the turn there is very sudden, but I think it works. Like, that this guy is just kind of lost as the episode goes on. But I think he does a pretty good job, and we'll see if that continues on to next week when he's a full-fledged world-ending Time Lord villain. We'll see how that works.
Yeah, as you mentioned, he was certainly played as the sad sack and just pushed to the brink by his overbearing wife Enid at the beginning, and then as you mentioned, he kind of in the middle there feels like again he's kind of playing the victim. He jumped in the time portal. He had the belt stolen from him. He was thrown in jail and forced to teach Tobias Manning how to use the technology and how cruel they were. And then at the end, we reveal that he's really just in it for himself. He hasn't learned anything. He was just waiting for his opportunity to steal his time machine back. So yeah, he is increasingly becoming more unhinged, and we see that as the episode goes on here after a lull in the middle, and then of course, as you mentioned, we'll get more of that next week as far as him becoming more and more pushed to the brink here.
Absolutely. And then we just have our 3 main Justice Leaguers to talk about. The great Susan Eisenberg as Wonder Woman. She doesn't have a main role to play in this episode. She has some funny lines. The bit about, again, we talked about already how kind of natural the rapport between her and Kevin Conroy and Phil LaMarr is in this episode. But like the bit where she's like complaining about the shoes, and he's like, "You fight crime in high heels," and she responds, "Yeah, high heels that fit." I think there's just some fun little lines there, and she has kind of a general distaste for the era. Not as much for her to do this week, but but she does a good job with what she's given, and she does get the bit at the start, which I feel like we should just introduce the other two because we can kind of talk about all their stuff together. Again, Phil LaMarr as Green Lantern and Kevin Conroy as Batman. The opening scene in the commissary, I think, is one of those scenes that's a big scene for the shippers, right? Of multiple different couples. You know, the Green Lantern Hawk Girl, the Green Lantern Vixen, the Batman, the Wonder Bat, Batman Green Lantern. I'm sure that one exists too. Yeah, that opening scene in the Justice League cafeteria, I think is delightful. I love that just as a setting of all of these superheroes in full costume having lunch together anyway. But then Batman and Green Lantern kind of needling each other about, you know, their own unrequited loves is a lot of fun. And then Diana showing up and kind of making Batman even more uncomfortable is a lot of fun as well. So all three of our main leaguers here do a great job.
Yeah, as you mentioned, they do take a bit of a backseat in our latter half of our second and third acts because it's a lot of action and more of a spotlight for our old Western heroes. But they do get some fun lines in there. You mentioned the Dirty Harry homage from the late Kevin Conroy is really good. We get some good one-liners from both Wonder Woman and John talking about the various different aspects of that they're interacting with. Wonder Woman's remark about the slowest and oldest bullets ever being fired at her as she's blocking them using her bracelets is great. But yeah, the commissary scene certainly steals the show as far as comedy and the interactions between we didn't get a ton between Batman and Jon Stewart in the original series. It sort of ramped up once a Starcrossed happened, and we get a little bit more of their interactions, and they continued on in that first season of Justice League Unlimited and through season 2. But it'll be interesting to see how much more. We know that Kevin Conroy plays a dual role next week. We get we also get Phil LaMarr playing a dual role next week. Some interesting things lie ahead as far as our voice acting for next week's episode. But as far as my score for this week's episode, I settled on an 8 out of 10. I think everybody's pretty strong as far as what the voice acting is. I think next week has the potential to elevate that score since we're looking at multiple performances from some of our greatest voice actors in the history of the DCAU.
Absolutely, yeah. I am also sitting at an 8 out of 10. So we shall see where we end up with all of our final scores next week. But yeah, strong effort. Again, a lot relied on for our guest cast, just because we have so many different parts being played here and different characters being introduced. So and a lot of exposition too that you have to work out to explain who everybody is and what's going on and what their individual motivations are and all that. So a lot of plates to spin at the same time with for our actors, and I think they all do a pretty darn good job so far.
There you go. All right, Liam, totaling things up here. So for our temporary scorecard here, after 1 week, after part 1 here, I end up, and I think we're going to end up with the same exact scores because despite differing on our first 2 categories, we just flip-flopped. I have a 33 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, I have the exact same one so far. So we'll see if that stands, if it comes up or goes down over next week when we review part 2. But hey, things are trending in the right direction so far. This episode's a blast. We'll obviously, even just with this part 1, we can already say it's like a double thumbs up for rewatchability. But we'll give our official verdict on that next week as well, I guess.
There you go. All right, so we'll see if that sticks, if it elevates, if it decreases. But interesting things lie ahead for us as we look at part 2 next week of the Once and Future Thing. It has its own subtitle as well that we'll cover next week. But yes, excited to do that with you next week, Liam. But before then, we'll, of course, thank our listeners for tuning in. Thank you for listening this week. If you would like to support the podcast, there are several different ways to do that. You can leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app of choice. Specifically, if you listen on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, 5-star reviews help us a lot, and especially if you do it on Apple Podcasts and leave a little blurb, they give you a little chance to tell people that might be interested or stumble upon our podcast what they're getting themselves into. So we, as always, thank people that have taken the time to leave those reviews, and we again remind you that if you choose to leave a review and you are within the continental United States, you leave a 5-star review, we read it on the air. Then you have the opportunity of getting a little free gift just for taking the time to do that. So if you live within the continental United States and you haven't left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and that's where you listen to us, stop what you're doing right now, do it, and then we'll check next week. If we read it on the air, we'll go ahead and send you that gift if you're within the continental United States as a little thank you. And then, of course, if you're listening on Spotify, we, of course, have a weekly poll that we put up, a question of the week that you can interact with. You can leave a comment on the pod also. We review those. You can also, of course, interact with us on social media at DCAU Review on Twitter/X, and, of course, on Instagram. I've had a lot of fun interacting with fans about a lot of stuff. It's the holiday season coming up. Got a ton of Batman collectibles and exciting comic book industry stuff just dropped, Liam, with New York Comic Con coming out. So stuff DCAU and non-DCAU DC Comics related. All lots of stuff to talk about and interact with us on your social media platform of choice. So do so by following us and reaching out to us at DCAU Review. I know Liam this week also, as is the cycle of things, every 3 or 4 months, the people that run Twitter decide that they're going to change something. Everybody hates it. They leave for 2 weeks and go to Blue Sky. So you finally pulled the trigger. You opened up a Blue Sky account. You can follow us on there. And then when you come back to Twitter like 3 weeks later, we'll still be there also. So that's listen, everyone, we know the cycle. We know how this works. You can't quit.
The thing that needs to happen for Blue Sky to work is that one of the other sites that people actually use, I need to be able to auto post to both, because that's the only reason that we still use Threads, is because there's a button on Instagram that says post to Threads as well. Mm-hmm. And you just go, sure, why not? That's the blockage I'm finding with Blue Sky so far. It's just remembering to open another app and post another and post the same thing, right? Post the links and the hashtags and all that stuff. It gets a little overwhelming at times, but heavy is the head that wears the social media magnate crown. It's really, I'm in the mines. The content mines. But,
thank you for your service.
Thank you. A lot of people say I'm braver than the U.S. Armed Forces, but I would never say that, of course. But no, yeah. So if you are a Blue Sky and you want to interact with us there, I am trying to check it at least once every couple of days. So we're not ignoring you if you do reach out to us there. But if we suddenly amass like a couple hundred or 1,000 followers, guess what? I'll have to do it.
That's right. So, make Liam do more social media content work, please.
That's right. The ball is in our listeners' court. If Blue Sky's the new hotness, then you gotta show up in numbers to get us over there. But yes, in the meantime, you can definitely find us posting regularly on our Twitter/X's and Instagram pages.
That's right. And and of course, if you want to support the podcast directly, check out the show notes. There'll be a link there directly to our store or directions on how to become a monthly supporter. We have quite a few monthly supporters that help us out each and every single month. You can join them by clicking on that link, and we give a special thank you to our monthly supporters. It really means a lot to both of us when we're doing the podcast, just as a little extra thank you. So if you want to join them and do so, it also means a lot because we understand the current financial climate that most people find themselves in, and that every dollar counts. So the fact that there are people that are willing to share that with us as a little thank you for the stuff that we do each and every week, that hopefully provides you a nice little distraction or a bit of comedy or entertainment, we thank you for doing so. So, Liam, as we've talked about all episode, we already know what we're covering next week. It's no mystery at all. Excited to come back here next week with you and tackle the exciting conclusion of this episode.
That's right. So we'll be back next week to talk about the Once and Future Thing Part 2, and we'll save the subtitle for when we get there. But yeah, can't wait. A lot again, this is like another like load-bearing wall episode of this one and next week's arc. So excited to get into one of the meteor episodes of the DCAU to talk about next week.
That's right. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU.
Bye-bye.